Welcome to Chapter 6 class, Early Baroque Vocal Music. I know we've been just moving quite quickly through the early part of music history, and we only spent 1 week on the medieval era and we only spent 1 week on the Renaissance. But now we're going to be actually spending the next several weeks in the Baroque era, and we have much more music that is still played and sung now, and I think you'll really have a chance to feel the sense of the Baroque style. By the time we finish this era, you should be very familiar with it. So we have a lot of different forces working kind of against each other in the Baroque era, in a sense. We have great extravagance, but also control in the music. So socially in Europe, freedom was the order of the day, and new styles and genres were appearing. Socially, individual people became quite free. But the freedom came with a price. The establishment still functioned according to very strict rules. There is the rigorous and systematic control of new forms of music, and the music is expressive yet organized. Opera is a very important part of the development of the Baroque era, and in fact we say that this era starts in the year 1600, which coincides with the early experiments in Europe around this genre. So what is an opera exactly? Well, it is a drama with actors singing their parts. It features elaborate stage sets and costumes, and the literal translation of the word is opera equals work. And whenever I go to an opera, I'm always amazed at how hard everybody around me on the stage is working and in the orchestra pit. So we can see in the map of Italy, Mantua, Venice, and Florence are in red, and these were centers for early opera. And it was first promoted by the Florentine Camerata. This was a very exclusive club in Florence, and it was made up of musical intellectuals and people who were highly educated, got together and had meetings about what sort of new innovation might be on the horizon that they could be creating. And a lot of the conversations ended up talking about what ancient Greek music might have sounded like, and also thinking about the Greek influence, which was looked back to still, just like in the Renaissance. Greek and the Roman era was considered to be a golden time of human civilization in Europe. Opera is the most characteristic Baroque art form. We say this because it really is the ideal vehicle for individual emotionalism, and it's the ideal example of the extravagance contrasting with control mentioned earlier. It's a lavish mix of many art forms, and within it we have the rigid schemes of Recitative and Aria. So as long as I'm throwing out some big words, here's some more. Libretto is the text, words that tell the story. Libretti usually were from ancient Greek and Roman myths during the early Baroque time, and they always began with an overture, which was an instrumental piece that opened at the very beginning of the opera, opened it. It uses something called monody. Monody is an expressive solo sung with sparse accompaniment meant to copy the singing of ancient Greek theater. Of course, we have no way of knowing what their music sounded like because nobody had any written descriptions that could tell them accurately what it might have sounded like, but they were greatly influenced by the plays of the time and the idea that there was a chorus in Greek plays, and so we also have a chorus in the operas. The recitative, musically heightened speech, which advanced the plot, is a very important part of an opera. If you ever attend an opera, things will go back and forth between recitative and aria. So let's break down the differences between the two. Recitative is on the left column and features free speech-like rhythms. The pitches follow speech patterns. And they have a basso continuo accompaniment. They use prose text, so words that are stated once. It really doesn't sound like poetry. This text advances the action. It tells the story, and usually is done in a dialogue between characters. Aria features a clear beat that's consistent. The pitches form melodic patterns and phrases. There is an orchestral accompaniment, not just the basso continuo. Basso continuo is only consisting of cello usually and harpsichord in the context of an opera. There is a poetic text. The phrases are often repeated. It freezes the action, and it's really a reflection about the plot. And it's, in the Baroque era, a soliloquy, which means expressing one emotion. Now, it might seem kind of random, like how will I tell the difference between a recitative and an aria? Well, you will be able to tell very easily, because with just the basso continuo accompaniment, you will hear the harpsichord and the cello emphasizing the bass line, and then you will hear a soloist singing something that is not very melodic. So when it says speech-like rhythms, this is nothing like a real opera, but I'm just going to do this off the top of my head, and that it advances the action, telling the story. I'm going to just make up a plot point. So let's say I'm telling you that there's an evil witch that's plotting to drive apart the queen and her husband. Oh, there is an evil witch. I saw her. She was sneaking around the cellar, and she tried to da-da-da, and so on, okay? It's not very melodic. And then the aria, which I am even less of a singer that can handle an aria, the aria will have a distinct beat and repetition of lines. It will freeze the action. So maybe the person just finding out that her best friend is plotting against her, or the witch is plotting against her, is going to be very emotional around that and is going to sing about her feelings around this betrayal. And so it's going to comment upon whatever actions the recitative has described. We have a partially filled out chart here, and eventually we will be talking about some more genres, cantata and oratorio, but right now we're going to concentrate on opera. And you can see, going down vertically, that the performance location is in a theater. The purpose is secular entertainment. This is not a religious thing, opera. Performance style is that it is fully dramatized. Staging, costumes, etc. It has a lot of extra things. Imagine staging an opera in the time before electricity, yet needing to have light in the theater, needing to figure out ways to create special effects, like people flying in, or maybe the sound of a thunderstorm. It was extremely elaborate to stage these productions and took a lot of creativity on the part of the people producing these things. The subject was classical mythology and ancient history. Musical forms, recitative and aria, which we discussed a little bit, and the accompaniment is an orchestra. Our first opera composer is Claudio Monteverdi, 1567 to 1643. Since the Baroque era began at about 1600, we can see that he was right in the middle of his lifetime, actually, when things shifted over into the Baroque style. And he was born in Cremona, Italy, which was near one of the big opera centers, eventual opera centers. As a boy, he sang in the cathedral choir and studied at the University of Cremona. He married a court singer. You notice I say court singer because that was one place where a female was allowed to perform in Italy. His marriage ended in tragedy because all three of their children died when they were very young, and his wife died. He was the last great madrigalist, and remember, madrigals were an important genre in the Renaissance, and the first great opera composer. So he really had one foot planted firmly in each historical era. His most important jobs were at the Mantua court from 1589 to 1612, and that was where he managed to have the opera's first masterpiece, Orfeo, created and staged. And then in the latter part of his career, he moved to Venice and worked at St. Mark's Cathedral, an excellent gig, from 1612 to 1643. And he was also in the employment of the court there, and a famous opera called The Coronation of Poppaea was written by him during that time. Interesting thing about this composer is that he wasn't stuck in the Renaissance fashion of the way that things were done. He was very much a trendsetter moving into the Baroque era. It probably makes a difference that he wasn't yet an old man, but he was a mature adult during this time, and he was forward thinking about a new type of music. Opera overtures. All operas, to this date even, begin with a purely instrumental piece called an overture. Orfeo's begins with one that is called toccata. It has a fanfare-like beginning featuring the trumpet, and we're going to hear this in a few more slides. Looking at the photo, you can see what it looks like sitting from the opera pit, the orchestra pit, looking up at the opera house from the pit. Often, depending on how many players are required for any given performance, an opera pit can become very crowded and also sometimes dangerous because things can fly into the pit like shoes and props, and occasionally, we hope not ever again, but occasionally maybe a person might fall in. So this first opera that we've been talking about, Orfeo, first staged in 1607, and it was the first important opera, meaning it's really the first opera that is still performed today and is considered to be a complete masterpiece of the early Baroque. It uses the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice as the plot. Orpheus is our hero and son of Apollo, and Eurydice is the mortal bride of Orpheus. And Orpheus is kind of in between God and person. He is sometimes described as a demigod. So the plot is that Orpheus and Eurydice marry only to have Eurydice claimed by the underworld on their wedding day, and actually she's killed. Orpheus vows to use his magical singing voice, he has a superpower, to charm his way into Hades, which is guarded by the Furies. He plans to rescue Eurydice from the king of the underworld. After he descends into the underworld successfully and makes a bargain with the king, he is allowed to lead her out. Unfortunately, he wasn't allowed to tell her that he couldn't look at her as he was leading her out of the underworld. And she's having a moment of great distress because she thinks she misreads the cues of him walking forward, and she becomes very distressed. Why will you not look at me? Am I so ugly now that I'm in the underworld? And so he at last looks behind at her, and actually she's killed at that moment because of the deal that he made. And Apollo, the god, intervenes and decides, oh, well, this is a very sad ending. So he transforms Orpheus into a constellation that radiates eternal spiritual harmony with his beloved Eurydice. And so the theme at the end is that they are happy together in the afterlife. The prologue of Orfeo is Del mio permesso amato, from my beloved Permessus, to you I come. And Permessus is an ancient river in mythology. A vocalist plays the character of music and gives a preview of the drama ahead. It's really like a narrator, but sung. And what I'd like you to listen for in this prologue is the tug of war between the soothing orchestral theme of the ritornello. A ritornello is a theme that repeats many times, and the passionate and emotional expression of the singer. There is a translation on page 91 of the text. So let's hear this link, which shows both the overture and then Del mio permesso amato. Notice there's a lute in the orchestra. It's more of a Renaissance instrument. And these are some historically inspired instruments. Here is the ritornello. And once again, we hear the ritornello. You have a listening guide for this, so we're not going to hear the whole thing. We want to get through all of this fairly quickly. Also, I have a few extra bits of music from the opera for you, which are not included in our text anymore, but I think that they also show us a little bit of the difference between the recitative and aria. So I mentioned at the beginning that Orfeo's bride, Eurydice, dies, and the plot is about how some witches plot to destroy their happiness, and so a snake attacks her, I think, on their wedding day, and all of a sudden she is now, he goes from being a happy groom to being a widower, and he's just crushed. And so the first part is something called an arioso, which is somewhere between a recitative and aria in vocal function, and is called Tu sei morta, thou art dead. So we'll just watch a little bit of this, and it's a little more melodic than a true recitative. Let's see if I can get it to come up here. So it goes on a little bit longer, but we're going to go to the next part now, which is Potente Spirito, because powerful spirit. Orfeo cannot imagine going on without his wonderful bride, so he's inspired to go after her in the underworld, which is sort of also, this is a different production. This is the monody that we heard about. He's heading into the underworld with his superpower, with his beautiful voice and ability to play the lyre. The singing is very florid and sounds a bit odd. He's now going to be crossing the river Styx to get to the underworld. So this just kind of gives you a little bit more of the actual plot of the opera and the chance to see parts of actually 3 different productions, because every production is completely different. So now there is a little bit more information about the roles of castrati in music, and we talked about them as their use was necessitated, evidently, in the Renaissance in the church, because a male voice, a male castrato voice, was more powerful than 5 choir boys. And so this transfers over into the opera world because in Catholic countries such as Italy, women were forbidden to be on stage. So they had these operas which needed female characters. 70% of Italian singers in the Baroque era were castrati, and beginning in the mid-1500s, up to 4,000 boys were having the procedure annually at one point, although only a few achieved rock star-like fame. The castrato voice had this unnatural combination of a high-pitched but powerful lungs of an adult. And this caused distorted physical appearance because the arms and legs never actually stopped growing in castrati. It threw hormones out of whack, and there were other health issues as well. One might wonder why anybody would want to become a castrato, but it's actually easier to understand if you watch this movie called Farinelli, which was about one of the most famous castratos of the 18th century. I will tell you that the movie has other parts of the movie than what I'm going to show you are probably rated R, but this scene from the movie is not. And the singer is actually doing real singing, and it's a male countertenor. Countertenors sing in falsetto voice and sound similar to the way castrati voices sounded. So let's hear a little bit of what a castrato might have been like in the context of a performance. This is actually the character Farinelli's brother, who was a conductor. He was a rock star, Farinelli. I'm going to forward it a little bit so we can hear more. Alright, so there is from the movie Farinelli, if anybody wants to follow that up and watch the movie. So now we move to England, where later in the Baroque era we have the first opera written in English by Henry Purcell. He was a great English Baroque composer, and he was a member of the Royal Chapel, the Chapel Royal, and he was organist at Westminster Abbey. He wrote sacred, instrumental, and theater music. He became involved with the growing London public concert scene. His influences were French and Italian music, and his opera Dido and Aenius was the first English opera. He wrote it for girls at a boarding school to stage. It was written in 1689, but we really haven't moved very far away yet from the ancient Greek inspiration. And so this is from Virgil's epic poem, the Aeneid. Virgil was actually a Roman citizen, and he wrote this poem, the Aeneid, and it has lots of different stories in it, but one of them is, it's an epic poem, so it goes on for a long time. And after escaping from Troy, the soldier Aeneas seduces Queen Dido of Carthage. And in opera, seducing is sometimes a bit it's a metaphor for rape, actually, but I'm not sure in this context. Actually, they began an actual relationship, so they are evidently a happy couple for a while, and jealous witches, again, the jealous witches, make Aeneas believe that Jove, who's a god, has ordered him to fulfill his destiny, sailing on to found the city of Rome. Furious at his rejection, Dido spurns him. He's kind of like, hey, sorry Dido, it's been great, babe, but gotta go figure out how to get this big city started over in Rome. And that's not exactly what they say, of course. But Dido dies of a broken heart in the final scene. And this drawing, of course, is of the poet Virgil. He was born about 70 BC, so the plot comes from a play written by him. Even though this is a tragic opera, like many in the Baroque era, it has some very happy moments. Dido and Aeneas love each other and are a power couple, at least for a while. In the scene linked below, Queen Dido and her maid Belinda and their court friends are enjoying a day in the countryside. It begins to rain, and Belinda urges everyone to return to the palace. Later, three sorceresses can't abide Dido's happiness and plot to trick Aeneas into leaving Carthage. We'll at least watch the beginning of this scene. This is not part of your listening guides for this week, but I thought you would enjoy hearing a happy song from the opera. You hear the chorus singing. So the song, the aria and chorus, is singing a very happy song in this case. So we know that this was one of the first operas written in English, and the first opera still performed today, certainly written in English. And at the end of the opera, when Dido is going to die of her broken heart, although in some productions she falls on a sword on purpose, we can see in the drawing that she is on this chaise, this sort of fainting couch, and is being attended by her maid Belinda. And this is called Dido's Lament, When I Am Laid in Earth, and it begins with a recitative, Thy Hand, Belinda, and it has a chromatically descending vocal line accompanied by the basso continuo. This is called a basso ostinato. Also in England they called it a ground bass. The bass line provides a solid foundation for this very sad aria, and a basso ostinato is a technique that was very common in Baroque music. It was often used to symbolize grief, especially when a descending line is used here. And so I will attempt to sing this, the basso ostinato, but I'm singing it much higher than it actually appears. Bum bum ba dum ba da dee da 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 dum. And that goes just like that, except lower, over and over and over, underpinning the song that she is singing. So listen for that basso ostinato and this beautiful rendition of this sad aria by Jesse Norman. You'll hear it first. There's the basso ostinato. Actually starting with the aria, we skipped the recitative in this version. I'd love to play all of it for you, but it would make this presentation so very long. You have a listening guide for this, and you can also go look up Jesse Norman singing this on YouTube for yourself if you would like to hear the entire thing. And lastly, before we are done, I especially like in the early music appreciation section to mix things up and play more modern pieces, sometimes in the more popular genre, just to demonstrate different aspects of the music. And basso ostinato is still used today, even in pop music, and it's still as effective as ever in underpinning sad ballads or poetry. So listen to this. And listen for the basso ostinato line.
It's prepaid, man. I can't even... My prepaid's much better than yours. My...
What have I got to do to make you love me?
Listen to the keyboards.
What have I got to do to make you care?
It's in the left hand of the
What do
piano.
I do when lightning strikes me? And the way to find that you're not there. What do I do to make you want me? What do I got to do to be heard? What do I say when it's all over? Sorry seems to be the hardest one. It's sad, so sad.
It's
It's a sad, sad situation.
obvious in the chorus.
And it's getting more
The guitar.
absurd. It's sad, so sad. Why can't we talk it over? Always seems to me. Sorry seems to be the hardest word. Seems to me, time seems to be the hardest word. What have I got to do to make you love me? What have I got to do to be happy? What do I say when it's all over? What have I got to do? What have I got to do? That sorry seems to be the hardest word. Yeah, baby, I said the hardest word.
Basso ostinato, folks. Well, I hope you enjoyed the beginning of our trek through the Baroque, and it is going to be a little more leisurely than the last 2 weeks. Huzzah! But get started digging into all of your material so that the next exam doesn't sneak up on you. And I'm available anytime you need to ask me a question, and have a terrific week. And don't forget to be going to that second concert, or first concert actually. I'm not sure what date this is because I'm recording this now in September, but there's 2 concert deadlines, and make sure that you are taking care of them.